Retro.
Hi, this is Emily Swallow, the Armorer in The Mandalorian. You're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. This is the way.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And just when we think we're finished, they pull us right back in. We are talking about the High Republic again. More specifically, we're going to cover Cavan Scott's one-shot High Republic finale from Marvel Comics here in just a minute. But before we do that, Jay, what are our social media contacts? So if people want to reach out to us, they can.
Absolutely. So you can contact us on Facebook and Instagram, very conveniently at Podcast Stardust.
All right. The digital line, the signal's boosted to maximum output. The shield is down, and we're now broadcasting to the galaxy. As I just said, we're going to be talking about the High Republic finale. It's a one-shot that I think the best way to describe it is it's not really the finale for all the High Republic. It is just for like some specific characters.
Yes.
Charles Soule's Trials of the Jedi, I think, was the real finale for the High Republic, but we'll get into that in just a second. Credits for this are, it was written by Cavan Scott. Artist was Marika Cresta. Colorist was Jim Campbell. Letters by VC Ariana Mayer. Cover artist was the wonderful Phil Noto. And the book design was by Carlos Lau. So, Jay, this really focuses on Keeve Trennis and the decision she makes, which we'll get into in a minute here. But what did you think about this one shot overall?
Well, when you said, it sucks us right back into the High Republic again. I mean, just when I thought that all of my emotions were out and my tears were shed, here comes Keeve Trennis in this particular one shot. But it was so good. I mean, it was very emotional in a lot of ways. And it kind of feels like it isn't ending the High Republic completely. Like it almost rebuilds a frame for what could potentially come next.
Mm-hmm.
But there's just so many different kinds of feels going on in here. It's not just a recap of who won and who lost through the entire High Republic saga, but it's kind of like a meditation on what it's cost to survive in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just so many different talking points I feel that we're going to get into on this, but it felt very nostalgic in a lot of ways to read this, and also pull back the curtain on some of the inner workings of a few different characters that again, kind of their psyche. And it was just so good. I was just so intrigued by the entire thing. I was sucked right in. But what do you think?
Well, I liked it. The thing about it is, it's not like there is a conflict that's apparent when you're reading this. Like there's an enemy to overcome like that. The problem, the issue in this book is Keeve Trennis making a decision that she doesn't want to make and the consequences of that decision. And so in a way, to me, this issue really kind of comes off as an epilogue for the High Republic more than it does like the conclusion to the High Republic. So I think you said that very well. And this, I mean, the very last cell of this whole thing says, the end, ... and a beginning. So they very clearly have left the door open for telling more stories in this era. And I really hope they do, because I like so many of these characters. But we'll get to that in a second here. But no, I liked it overall. It does answer a question that was left over from, that we knew from the get-go on here, which is, and now we're going to get into spoiler territory, which is, why does Keeve Trennis end up leaving the Jedi Order? She's one of the 20 that has a bust in the archives at the Jedi Temple for having left the Order. And this was also specifically mentioned in Dooku Jedi Lost, the audiobook that Cavan Scott wrote. We just didn't know how to get from point A to point B there. And now we do. And so we'll get to that decision here in a second. But the whole thing starts off with Keeve as Marshal of the Stormwall Defense Fleet returning to Coruscant above the Geos. And she is struggling with the conclusion of this war. And more specifically, that Lourna Dee shot the Child of the Storm, Hatar. I was the one that was able to project all of the fears back to the Jedi to try and anybody for that matter and confuse them and stuff like that. Where Keeve kind of wanted the opportunity to redeem her the way that other Children of the Storm had been redeemed. And Lourna, I kind of got the impression is, I'm not sure defensive is the right word, but or necessarily resentment, but something along those lines that, this decision that she made, Lorna's like, this had to be done, that Hatar was costing us in this battle. If that wasn't done, we would have lost here. But what did
Mhm.
you make of all that?
Yeah, well, for Kyiv, obviously, we've known from the get-go that she was kind of thrust into these positions of, having to be a leader and having to make decisions and having to not only be a leader, but also kind of be the moral compass for a lot of the things that were happening. And it's kind of hard to do that when you got Lourna Dee on your ship. But, Lorna, for her part, she's always been kind of that morally ambiguous kind of character to begin with. And she's a
Mhm.
realist. I think that she felt, yeah, I did need to do this because she's right. I mean, there could have been some really terrible consequences because this child was getting into their psyche and their souls, and twisting them in ways that were just horrific. But I think that was the straw, proverbial straw that broke the camel's back for Kyiv in a way that, it opened kind of a force wound for her. I wrote down that it's one of those things that I think for her is an unsolvable feeling. And I think that that's why, one of the impetus of why she ended up making that decision to leave the order. And it wasn't an easy one for her.
Yeah, and we'll get into those reasons here in a bit because
Yeah,
that's a conversation that warrants its own segment of the show. But
absolutely.
yeah, I think one of the things is that I remember one of our Revenge of the Sith episodes. We had Tom Gross on as our guest, and he's of course one of the hosts of Teachers in the Dungeon. And I'd asked the question about alignment, character alignment, and stuff, because
Yeah.
in Dungeons and Dragons, because it's hard to necessarily figure it out. And that conversation, as well as an episode of Teachers in the Dungeon that they did not too long ago, where they specifically broke down alignments, occurred to me when I was thinking about this part of the comic, which is you got Keeve Trennis, who's always been good, right? And she has always wanted to follow the will of the Force, and she's always wanted to help people and stuff like that. So in a sense, she's lawful in that regard, but she's not real happy with some of the decisions of the Jedi Order. But she's not like chaotic. She doesn't just do what anything that her conscience tells her. She really struggles with this stuff. Meanwhile, you have Lourna, who was out and out evil. I mean, she had no issue with murdering people and stuff until, with the help of some of the Jedi and other things, she put two and two together and she realized all the motivations for her actions. And so she definitely was redeemed in that sense that, now she's trying to do right by the galaxy. And we'll get a really good example of it in a minute. But she's not bothered by her conscience and this notion that, I'm trying to figure out how to say this. She's very much, I will do what has to be done.
Mhm.
And, that's more chaotic than it is lawful. And so, she's someone I would describe maybe at best as chaotic good, but, maybe call her neutral good. I don't know. Still clumsy with alignments, even though I feel like I understand them a little bit better. But at any rate, it's, I can see why, that's a long way of me saying I can see why Keeve is bothered by all this. She's struggling. She even points out that, we invited Lourna to try and make a change, to be a different person. And I can't be upset with her when she took us up on that. And she did something that she thought was going to aid us, that was going to aid the galaxy and defeat this evil, even if it is what she didn't want. And so I can see that. It's like, I wish it had turned out differently, but I can't be mad at her for the decision she made.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. And I think that that kind of trauma was a big driver
Mhm.
for Keeve in this whole thing too, because it really was kind of a traumatic thing for her to have
Indeed,
to deal with.
indeed. So they get to the temple. We get a brief scene with Tarek and Sarah, and this again, sticking with the epilogue idea. Throughout the second half of the High Republic, they were struggling with each other. I can't remember which one of them it was that wanted to be more independent, but the other one was, very much holding on to their status as bonded twins. There, that they
Mhm.
shared a consciousness and they were always completing each other's thoughts and the like. But they have come up with a compromise that will give them a little bit more independence, but recognize that the fact that they're always going to be twins and they're always going to have this bond, which was nice because they were crucial to the end of Trials of the Jedi, and they did get alarmed when their connection kind of got broken because was it Sarah? I can't again. It doesn't matter. But
I
Sarah
know,
was
I
injured
always get
there.
them mixed up.
Yeah, on Safrona. But yeah. So that was a nice touch, adding that in there. But what do you think?
No, I totally agree, and it just shows that they were willing to evolve based upon the situations that they had to endure and that they were able to embrace that, and yeah, I thought it was a really nice touch. I liked it.
Mhm. Okay. Well, they also kind of let slip that Elzar and Avar did not return. And so this
Mhm.
is going to be a big spoiler discussion for Trials of the Jedi. If you haven't read it yet, you may want to avoid this. And so she wants to know what happened. She's looking at this as a tragedy. And so she talks to Yoda about it. And Yoda doesn't spell it out here what happened. And I kind of appreciated that because if you'd read this comic first, you would have just had the entire
Right.
ending of Trials of the Jedi
Yeah.
spoiled for you. So at any rate, but we know, having read the book and having discussed it with Greg Cass, and but at any rate, so she's emotional about that, and Yoda then offers her a seat on the Jedi Council, and she kind of protests that she isn't ready for that, and she's gonna think about it and make a decision later. But she essentially turns it down for now on this. What did you think about that gesture here of Yoda offering her a seat on the Jedi Council?
Well, first of all, just backing up really quickly to when Key finds out about Avar and Elzar, the panel where she just clasps her mouth, you could just tell she was just completely in awe over that, and that emotion that was conveyed in that was just amazing. But
Hmm.
I think Yoda, he's always seen something very special in Keeve. Even though Keeve has always had an I don't want to call it an issue necessarily in believing her in herself, but even in this comic in general, we get to see the same things that we've seen throughout our entire journey with Keeve in the comics, in that those little boxes are
Hmm.
kind of her internal dialogue. And she's always been, kind of second guessing herself and thinking that she's not worthy or that she's, not measuring up or whatever. So for Yoda, I think to see what her worth actually is, it really it says a lot. And I don't
Hmm.
think he was wrong in offering her that position. I just think that there was always something missing within Kiev that prevented her from being able to accept it.
Yeah. So a couple observations. I think the going back to what you're saying about her reaction to the news about Elzar and Avar, I think it hit especially hard because Avar is the one that appointed her a bunch of positions that gave her a lot of authority and stuff like that, and saw something in her and there. And so that would be a big shock for her to find out that Avar is not coming back from Planet X, where the Nameless are, because she's got to fulfill that role with Elzar about maintaining the balance there. Two, I think Yoda sees a little bit of Qui-Gon Jinn in Keith. Of course, Qui-Gon Jinn comes later, but you know what I mean. This is
Sure.
a character type that we got to know well before Keeve Trennis was ever created there, in that she does not take a rogue position the way Qui-Gon does from the Jedi Council, but she is right now not being shy about questioning the Jedi Council here
Hmm.
and questioning whether her path with them works there. And so, Qui-Gon was not afraid to do what he must, or as the Force bids, as he would tell Obi-Wan, back in the Phantom Menace there. And I think that might be what made her attractive to Yoda as someone that they could promote so quickly from Jedi Knight to Jedi Master, and now to this position on the Jedi Council. It's a voice that's needed. It's not
Mhm.
just another consenting voice. It's a voice of dissent that they could use on the council. And, that's what you want from a body. You want different types of opinions.
Sure. And I think too for Yoda, he may have sensed that Keeve was very, you know, has this dilemma going on within her.
Mhm.
And so maybe by offering her this seat on the council, it would help her to have a little bit more confidence and to solidify her place in all of it and not lose her. You know what I mean? Maybe that was kind of his last ditch effort to say, well, maybe if we offer the seat, she will be more confident. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
we can kind of help her in that.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminded me of, who was it? When they were offering something to Avar, I think it was in Trials of the Jedi. And there was somebody else, I can't remember, but he basically made the comment, or no, it was Qui-Gon in John Jackson Miller's book about, knowing a refusal. When I see one, I do, after Qui-Gon
Oh
had been
yeah.
non-committal about something there. He knows in this case when, it's not something that he just embraces right away. Okay. Well, 4 months later, they are on Dalna, which was, of course, hugely important throughout the history of the High Republic, both
Yes.
phase 2 and phase 1, and it came up again in phase 3. But they are turning this into a sanctuary world, and they're calling the project the Beacon. And of all people, like Lourna Dee is one of the key architects of this whole thing. And she's like one of the first people we see there on the planet. And she's very nervous about, like, getting everyone into place, finishing everything up before the Jedi arrive for this big celebration that they're about to have. And, just so getting back to our conversation about Lourna for here a bit, it was one thing when she, rejected the Nile, rejected the storms, and the tempests and all that type of bit, and started doing work for the Republic. But this goes well beyond that. She's now taking an active role, and she even makes a comment later that, she is the money behind this that's funding with the work on Donald, but she gives
Yeah.
credit to the people that are putting in the actual work. And she openly says, that she's got debts to repay, and this is the way she's going about it. But it's a progression of the character here, but it was touching in a way. I don't even know how else to put it, but I really like the decision that they made with this character.
I do too. And honestly, you talk about Star Wars being rooted a lot of times in redemption. And Lorna really was, I mean, from the get-go, her character really started off with a horrible misalignment of fate. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so she found herself just sort of spiraling into this life of with a Nihil and just being more on that evil side. But honestly, again, it kind of comes to that full circle place, and I love the fact that she's able to literally fund the
Mhm.
beacon, and she, is now kind of edging towards someone who really helps to uphold that metaphor of being a beacon,
Mhm.
kind of standing for people who are lost, or even though she's still kind of morally messy, she's still closing that gap between where she was with the Nihil and kind of in the dark, and then now coming to the light. So I really appreciate that. Do I think she has a full redemption? No, not yet. She's got a way to go. But I think she's still kind of torn, and I think this is sort of the way that she's also rebuilding a lot of those rifts in her own, value system and in just who she is in general. So I really appreciate why her arc and how her arc has come back the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was funny when, she's kinda getting twitchy because, like, not everything is set up and it's not ready yet, and then all of a sudden the ship with the Jedi arrives, and she addresses them, noble friends and colleagues. Skeer's like,
Yeah.
"Noble?" And she's like, "I already regret having said it, scale face," or something along those lines, but she's doing her best. And then Lena So shows up as well. Of course, the Chancellor of the Republic, and she makes a comment about how gratifying it is to see that Lourna is now doing this work,
Yeah.
which was pretty cool. But then Lourna also gets Chancellor So is touched by the fact that they've elected to call this thing the Beacon,
Hmm.
and it's being equated to one of the great works, and recognizing the Starlight Beacon, which of course fell at the end of Phase 1 here. It's kind of funny because like Lauren didn't notice that Lena So had shown up, and all of a sudden she turns around, there she is with her big Targons.
There he is.
It's like, oh, didn't know you there.
Yeah, and she even says this could be potentially the greatest work of all.
Uh-huh.
And then she gets that little tear that comes down her face.
Well,
So it's very
we are all
touching.
the Republic, is what it comes
We are
down
all
to.
the Republic.
It
Yep.
is the people of the Republic that are making this happen. It's not so much a function of government there. Um,
Hmm.
but then we get the feast, and that was fun. Kind of getting the dialogue or the thoughts from Keeve Trennis about how various Jedi Masters were doing a jig. We got to see the characters, including Nibs from the Young Jedi Adventures. I think this is the first time that they've appeared in a comic. Not having read the High Republic, I'm sorry, they appeared in Young Jedi Adventures, that series, and I don't know if they appeared in the High Republic Adventures comic. They could have, but this is the first time we've seen them in Marvel's High Republic comics. And then just other characters. Vernestra Ro was there. Orbelin shows up. Tay's there, and he's kind of supervising the recovery of the former Children of the Storm that are also doing work to restore Dalna. There, a lot of fun things. But anything else from the feast that stood out to you?
Yeah, it's kind of a who's who, of a lot of the characters in the High Republic, and again, it's kind of quiet but profound, sort of a thing that we're going to be saying goodbye to a
Mm-hmm.
lot of these characters, even though, like we said, it kind of allows for a next chapter kind of a thing. But I do think that it was awesome the way that a lot of these characters were worked into that scene.
Yeah, I'm flipping through some of the shots here, and I don't recall seeing like Bel Zettifar there, but he was kind of off his doing thing. And of course, Rhys Silas, we know from Trials of the Jedi, was going after Aslan Rel. Uh,
I
but
think
but
Belle was there because I remember seeing his Charhound
oh,
in
you're
one of
right.
the
Now that I
uh-huh,
see, yep, there he is. There's a Wookiee Jedi in the back. I
Umber.
can't tell if that's Buriaga or if that's Arkoff or who in this situation.
I assumed
Uh,
it was Buri just because Belle was right there, and those 2 are kind of inseparable in a lot of ways.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's fun. It's fun watching them, all there. And the other thing is you have so many different artists that are drawing this that you can't be certain sometime from issue to issue, thing to thing.
Good point. Yep.
So
Yep.
it can be hard to tell. But the feast comes to an end, and it's time for the Jedi to get back to business on Coruscant. And so they're boarding their ship. Sskeer still hasn't seen Keeve, and then he turns around, and there she is, and Lourna leaves so that they can talk. And Keeve is not in her robes, and she basically tells Sskeer that she's not returning to the Order. That she's going to return her lightsaber. She's going to give it to Sskeer or the Grandmaster, of course, Yoda, to take it. And basically, Yoda shows up, and she explains that she has become afraid of what the Jedi are or what they will become. And then she's thought about this a lot, and she realizes that bad things happen when they don't talk to each other, because Sskeer kind of tries to interrupt her. And then she really gets to the point. What happens if there is a threat out there worse than Marchion Ro? What happens then? The Guardian protocols in perpetuity next time? Jedi leading armies into battle? Lightsabers swung in anger? She just completely predicted what happened
Yeah,
during the Clone Wars there.
she sure
Uh,
did.
and in a way, I kind of wonder, I mean, is that what this character was supposed to be about this entire time? Predicting this type of a fate for the Jedi when they don't adhere to the code. And they don't, she says that all she wanted to do was to help people and to serve, but she wasn't allowed to do that. They made her marshal and sent her off to the war. And
Right.
so she couldn't follow that anymore. I mean, she's got a point, but what do you think?
Oh yeah, she totally predicted all of this stuff. And her force intuition was absolutely right, obviously. And so I think there's so many layers to this decision that Keeve made, and I think that that's one of them. This feeling about what could the Jedi potentially become, and also witnessing all of these irreversible acts. Most recently and notably with Lourna Dee killing the Hatar,
Mhm.
and Keeve didn't want that to happen. And it's hard for Keeve, I think, too, because even though Yoda always tells her she's always gonna have a home at the temple, she sometimes has these feelings of being unheard, I think,
Yeah.
a lot of times, and that she's carrying a lot of these burdens alone. She's had so much role pressure and responsibility, but she also, I think, she just desires a path beyond what the order is constraining her to. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
she understands the framework of the Jedi, and she respects that. But she wants to be so much more. So I think that those all of those layerings together, and it's both tragic and it's beautiful, at the same time, to seek that autonomy that she's doing.
Yeah, it kinda makes me wonder if maybe she shouldn't have been a way seeker, you know,
Yeah,
or the
yeah.
journey. But, um,
Right.
but here's the
And
other.
go ahead. I just real quick though, I wanted to, and I know I'm kind of skipping ahead, but she becomes a speaker of the beacon.
Mhm,
So speaker just there's so many different places where we see that title in
mhm.
other stories and things. How do you interpret that?
Oh, I think she's essentially the, prime
Just
minister,
representative kind of
yeah,
person? Okay.
leader of that society. It's the, you know, you think of Speaker of the House, and that's the leader of the House, the one that sets the agenda and leads them through, things like that. But I think that's the type of role. It's an administrative role, and she's going to be key into running things there. Excuse me. So yeah, that's my take on it. But we'll adjust that point here in just a second again. For me, it's the yeah, I don't begrudge her following her conscience here. This is not the first time we've heard Jedi express concern about getting involved in the affairs of the Republic and serving as warriors, serving as generals, and the like. However, and I can appreciate that, and that there probably should be some autonomy for the Jedi that object to these type of positions here. And she's right. That's the Clone Wars is what she just describes here. But I
Yeah.
guess my question is like, well, what if you don't get involved?
Mhm.
Do you just let Marchion Ro conquer the galaxy with the Nile? And was the Force silent in this regard the entire time? I mean, that's just the unanswered question. Is that I can appreciate the sentiment here that we're not meant to be soldiers, we're not meant to be generals, but you are meant to serve the light, the Nile, the blight, the Marchion Ro. Those stood against the light. So how is it not in your moral force obligations, for lack of a better term,
Mhm.
to stand up to those things?
Yeah.
And if we swap it out and look ahead to the Clone Wars here, and this could probably be its entire episode, and we're almost out of time the way it is. But if the Jedi didn't lead the Republic armies to this into battle, and they worked out of their temple and sent people to where they're needed, how much were they going to actually get done with battle droids by the hundreds of thousands invading worlds and subjugating things there? What was the outcome going to be? If not, if you're not going to take action, then when do you take action? What is it?
Right.
You know, to borrow a term here, what's the beacon that you look forward to get guidance in all of this?
Mhm.
So, um, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just looking for a better explanation to this.
Right. And I think, when the Jedi got started on this whole thing, I mean, you look at the Jedi of the High Republic, and like you said, we could go off on a huge tangent here. But you
Mm,
look at the Jedi of the High Republic and where their standards were and what they felt that their role should be within the galaxy. And at the time it was, obviously for light and life, and they were the upholders of peace and that type of thing. But it's not until you are faced with an evil like the Nihil that you're truly faced with putting that role to the test. So I think that because of the fact that Keeve witnessed so much of that evolution of, all things Jedi that came before it, kind of getting into galactic politics and, all these different bricks of destiny that are kind of coming into play and just dealing with the evil that is Marchion Ro, it just completely changed the overall outlook of what it meant to be a Jedi to her.
Yeah.
And you're right. I think, you know, I think they were almost like they had to step in because that was their role, but I don't think they knew really what they were getting into until they got into it. And then by then it was in for a penny, in for a pound.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and frankly, if the Jedi did not get involved in here, the whole galaxy was getting consumed by the blight and the Force was getting gobbled up in the process. So
Right. Yeah.
it's like I said, I understand her concerns. By taking the actions they did, they basically risked not listening to the light, not listening to the will of the Force, and falling to the dark side and creating other problems. But at the same time, if they don't get involved, there's a very harsh opposite outcome to this entire story.
Sure.
Marchion Ro was going to get his way, and the galaxy, he was going to make the final decision, and the galaxy was going to get consumed by this. So,
Yeah. And they couldn't turn their back on that. Yeah.
yeah. But the whole thing ends with a rather touching sentiment, and that is, Sskeer turns and leaves with Yoda without saying a thing to Keeve, and she says, that's when my heart broke in that panel of the comic. But then he turns around and says, like, okay, when do we start? And he he basically imposed his will on Yoda and the council, which is, I'm going to be the Jedi liaison to the beacon. And
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely love that. I think the Sskeer Keeve relationship is one of the great ones here in the High Republic. You'd mentioned the couples when we were doing our discussion of Trials of the Jedi, and this is one that we didn't really get a chance to. Well, they were barely in as a couple. Trials of the Jedi, but
Mm-hmm.
but this she points out how that she's going to be the speaker, and so he's going to have to answer her, and he's like, well, like, how does that change anything? And then she's like, shut up, Dad. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I was gonna say that she calls him dad.
yeah. So I love that end. I was afraid for a moment there when Sskeer left without saying anything that it was going to be a bitter separation of those two.
Mhm.
But then when she asks him that, well, when did this happen? He goes, 10 minutes ago. So, he didn't realize there was going to be a liaison. And so I like that for Sskeer because he did not have to give up being a Jedi. He let her make her decision. And right after she had talked to everyone about how I've always had these doubts, but everyone told me I could do it and everyone believed in me, but this is not my path. And he did not attempt to talk her out of it. He let her make her
Right.
decision, and he made his, which is, this is the place where I can best serve the Jedi, best serve the Force, and best support my former Padawan. And that was huge. I think that was a great note to end on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and it's very dad-like because, I mean,
Mhm.
you think about it, and that's what we do with our own kids. You raise them to hopefully follow the morals and the guidance that you've given them, and sometimes they go a different path, but they still have the essence of that at heart, and so you try to be there for them and guide them in that and, just try to be with them on their journey, and that's exactly what's happening here.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. And that brings us to the end. And as we said a second ago, dot, 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 and a beginning. So who
Yeah,
knows what they will do with this era and these characters going forward, but I certainly hope they give us more.
me too.
Okay, well then that concludes this discussion of the High Republic finale by Cavan Scott and this episode of Podcast Stardust. We hope you've enjoyed it and thank you for joining us. If you've enjoyed the discussion, please consider subscribing to the podcast if you haven't done so already. And we would also love it if you could rate and review the show on your podcatcher that supports such things. As I always say, those are some of the biggest factors that drive the algorithm and get the show in front of others. So if you're enjoying the show, let's help get in front of more eyes or more ears, as the case may be. Uh, Beyond that, if you want to catch up on some really old back episodes of the show, the best place you can do that is over at retrozap.com. where the entire catalog of the previous 948 episodes can be found, as well as some other great shows that are on the network. Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody of those social media contacts and where else we can be found online?
Absolutely, Dennis. We are very easily found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. So please share that out with all your friends as well. And welcome to all of our new followers. I know we have quite a few, and so we sure do appreciate the support. And you can also check out all of our Pinterest boards that we have. Tons of different ideas for everything Star Wars over there. And then our 2 YouTube outlets, which contain, or I should say, which consist of both the regular YouTube and YouTube music. So head over to both of those, like, subscribe, and share those out. And then if you would be so kind to check out our TeePublic store, we do have 7 different show logo designs available on all kinds of fun things, from t-shirts and sweatshirts, tank tops, coffee mugs, tote bags, wall hangings, and all kinds of fun things in between. So all of those purchases do help to support the show, and we sure do appreciate it. So once again, check out that TeePublic link in our show notes.
Okay, upcoming on the show, Friday, we'll be wrapping up the week with a look at Star Wars news, and then Monday, we'll be starting another week with our discussion of Episode 3, or Part 3, of LEGO Rebuild the Galaxy Pieces of the Past. So, thanks for listening to episode 949 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great rest of your week, and until next time, may the Force be with you.